Hey everybody, it's me, Root Beer, and today I am espousing the power of friendship. So, we still have a couple of weeks before set 4 releases, which means I still have time to do lyrical posting, and I actually finally read the new friend support card for Fortia, and actually it's pretty good, so I thought I'd do a deck profile for this. Fortia is one of those decks where every now and then I'll just break it out because I'm bored and it's cheap, and honestly doesn't do terribly. I think last time I brought it to locals, it was at the end of the original overdress era, so Shiranui and the Stride decks had come out, and I remember going 2-2 with it. I think I actually beat a Shiranui player, which felt pretty nice, though they did blank their drive checks, so it's not the most impressive thing in the world. But yeah, I don't think this deck is terrible. I think it's actually pretty underrated. It does have a very key weakness, which is that it is extremely board dependent. I have Fortia pulled up here, and as you can see, you need to have 5 or more other friends for her to be able to do her thing, which means you just have to commit a full board every turn, and with the meta being pretty removal heavy right now, that can be a bit of a problem. But in fairness to Bushiroad, they have been giving this deck a lot of the tools to mitigate that weakness. So let's get into the discussion, shall we? So first up, Fortia herself, we are going to play the dress-up version in the ride deck. So if you have another unit in the same column, they become friends, and then if you have 3 or more friends, she gets drive +1. Then, if you Persona Road this turn, you can pay this cost with Counterblast 1, discard a card from your hand instead. At the end of the battle that she attacks, if you have 5 or more other friends, discard a card with Fortia in her name, stand this unit, and she gets drive -2. So, she is a big ol' restander. This particular version gets to do 4 drive checks, so you start with a triple drive, then go down to a single drive on the restand, which is pretty cool. It's actually a decently strong card. None of it is grade locked, so you can actually get a decent amount of early advantage on your opponent. We are just running the rest of the friend ride line, so the grade 2 is if you have another friend, when you would ride Fortia from your ride deck, you can ride it without discarding, and then the grade 1 is when you ride on top of it, you can call it a rearguard circle, so you just call it behind the vanguard, boom, you have another friend, and I'm playing Shizuku as the starter because Shizuku is the best starter. For the main deck options, so if you haven't watched any of the other deck discussions, what I like to do is I like to talk about all of the cards I've kind of considered for the deck before going into a couple of sample lists. So, things to consider. The original Fortia. So this one is not as good as the new one because she doesn't get an extra drive. However, the core ability is still the same. If you have 5 or more other friends, you can Counterblast 1, discard a card, stand it, and then she gets power +5,000 and drive -1. So the thing she has over the original is she does gain a little bit of power on her own, and unlike the original where you have to discard a Fortia if you don't Persona Ride, this one is just Counterblast 1, discard a card, so there is a little bit more flexibility with the cost. Then we also have Arlette, who is a friend card. She has the friend ability, and then at the end of the battle of the attack, if you have 3 or more other friends, use Soul Blast 1, return this unit to your hand. Like I said, one of the key weaknesses for the friend strategy is that you need to have a full board at all times, so being able to pounce a card back to your hand is pretty good for dodging removal and kind of keeping the deck a little more consistent. The main thing against this card is that it doesn't really do anything else, it just kind of bounces herself back to the hand. Next up, Valshablon. This deck can't afford to play Cyclers just because you're not using your soul for all that much, if we're being honest. It's not a great choice just because you need to have things with the friend ability, but if you happen to have Valshablon, you could play her. Next up, we have a new card from the latest lyrical set, Ravana. So she has the friend ability, and then when she's placed on the rearguard circle, you can Energy Blast 3, choose a card with the friend ability, and a different card name from herself from the drop zone, and put it into your hand. So, like I said, removal is a big weakness for this deck, so one of the ways you can rebuild is being able to bring cards back from the drop zone. She can also function as a budget cycler as well, so you can discard one of your other friend names, then call this early and put it back into your hand, so you can kind of recoup that loss in a way. Speaking of recouping things from the drop zone, Stolas, which is a promo card. So if you have a total of 3 or more other rearguard or 3 or more rearguards with the friend or powerful ability, she gets boost. So she doesn't have either keyword herself. She was kind of designed to support both of the set 2 archetypes in one swoop. And then, when this is placed on the rearguard circle during your main phase, choose a card from your soul, put it into the drop zone. This is mandatory, so because she's also powerful support, it forces you to empty your soul to engage the powerful keyword. And then if you have a Vanguard with the friend or powerful ability, choose a card from the drop zone with either of those keywords, and you may call it to rearguard circle. If you call a card, you cannot call cards from the drop zone until end of turn. Funny enough, this doesn't actually interfere with Ravana, so she returns a card from drop zone to hand instead of calling it, so you can do both of these in one turn. Next up, Precia. Same thing with Valshablan, you can afford to play cyclers, so if you have them, you have them. Once again, doesn't have the keyword, so maybe not the best option, and Ravana is just a cheaper version of more or less the same thing. Instead of going through your deck, you're recouping something from the drop zone, but that's still pretty nice. Next up, from Lyrical Set 4, we have Belian. So she has the friend keyword, and then during your turn, if you have 3 or more other friends, all of your Vanguards with 14 in their name get power plus 5,000, and if your opponent's grade 3 or greater, she gets 10,000. So she can be a very big beater and give a little bit of extra power to Forita, so helps make up for the fact that Dress Up Forita doesn't have the 5k that the original does. Next up, Melty, an old staple that doesn't see as much play anymore, so she has the friend keyword, and when it's placed on rearguard circle during the main phase, you can counterblast 1, choose a card with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard from your hand, call it to rearguard circle. If you call a card, you can draw a card. So old staple to get you a little bit of extra advantage and early pressure going. Not too bad, but a little bit outdated at this point. I think because she has the friend keyword, she's still in consideration for this deck though. After that, we have Roxella, so she was something from Lyrical Set 3, has the friend keyword, and then when it attacks a Vanguard, if you have 3 or more other friends, she gets power plus 5,000, and if you have 5 or more, choose one of your rearguards with the friend ability that is not in the same column as her and return it to your hand. So, very similar to Franquette, which was introduced in DZ Set 2, except kind of worse because you have to have 5 other friends, so basically a full board, and then you can only choose things with the friend keyword that are not in the same column as her, so it's a lot of restrictions on something that you can do with Franquette. The main reason you would play this over Franquette is because she has the friend keyword, and also because Franquette is expensive. Next up, another card from the latest Lyrical set, Amicia. So she has the keyword, and then during your turn, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Fortia in this card name, and this unit is friends, all of your units in the same column as this unit get power plus 5,000. So if I'm interpreting this correctly, she doesn't say other unit the way that other cards do, so I have to imagine that she gives 5k to herself and then whatever else is in her column for a total of 10, which is very nice. That's very big beater that you can have. Next up, Yuika, the eternal lyrical staple. So, at the end of the battle, it boosted a rearguard, you Soul Blast 1, return it to your hand, and when your other unit is placed in the same column as her, and your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, she gets 5k. So, like I said before, one of Friend's problems is that you need board presence, so being able to bounce something to your hand early on to protect yourself from removal is nice. It means you can just, kind of call things out early, attack, bounce it back to your hand. So if you open Melty and Yuika, you can go Melty, draw a card, call Yuika, and then Yuika bounces the Melty back to your hand, so you could do it again next turn. All in all, just a good card to have. The only downside is that she doesn't have the friend keyword, obviously. Next up, we have Ambel. So she's a grade 1 that was introduced in Lyrical 4. She has the friend keyword, and when it boosts a unit attacking a grade 3 or greater unit, if you have a Vanguard with 14 in this card name, and you have 5 or more other friends, so basically a full board, Soul Blast 2 and your opponent cannot call Sentinels from your hand until end of battle. So, there are a few things you could do with this. The most obvious one is to just put it in Fortia's column, so that when you restand, either you could do it the first attack, so you're 3 drive checks, and you have the Sentinel restrict, so your opponent's really in a pinch to try and guard the Fortia. Or you can attack with Fortia first, get your drive checks. Let's say you check like a critical trigger or something, you put it on the Fortia, attack with the Sentinel restrict. That is another way that you can get really big pressure going on your opponent. All in all, a pretty good card. The only thing is that Soul Blast 2 is pretty hefty. Because you're having to play a critical mass of friend cards, you're not going to have ways to soul charge, really. So this is one of those cards where you maybe play like 1 or 2 copies of it, just as a way to like close out the game. Next up, we have Juliana, a card that was introduced in Festival Collection. So it has the friend keyword, and then when it boosts, if you have a grade 3 or greater Fortia or Mediel, choose one of your other friends and gets 5k. I do think this is largely replaced by Amicia, but it is still something you can consider if you really want to go all in on just gaining a bunch of power. And then finally, we have Sound in the Wind Ducala. So when your other unit with the friend ability is placed in the same column as this unit, if you have 3 or more other friends, you can counterblast 1 and draw a card. Keep in mind that this does not have the friend keyword itself, so if you are going to be playing this, you do have to be a little careful about how you arrange your board to be able to like get everything to be friends. Oh, and I did put the blue over trigger here. I think Ida's Faro is probably the best choice because you have a restanding Vanguard. Just having like a gigantic critical trigger is pretty helpful. And cycling a card back from the drop zone is a nice piece of utility as well because, again, the main weakness of this deck is just removal. So as far as sample deck lists are concerned, there's not actually too much customization to do just because you are kind of locked into the friend keyword. So for this version of the build, which is the like slightly poorer version, I believe everything here is under $10 except maybe for Sanctitude, but you can just play the cheap Sanctitude instead. So we're playing 6 Fortias because you do need discard for or the dress-up version of the deck. We are playing 4 of Ravana to be able to act as a budget version of a cycler. Playing 3 copies of Stola, same thing, just more ways to recoup advantage from the drop zone. We are playing Belian for extra power. We're playing Roxella because she bounces things back to your hand to kind of protect you against removal. We are playing Amicia because big power. We're playing exactly 1 copy of Ambel for kind of the win con. You can maybe bump it up to 2 copies. I think because we have Ravana in the deck, you don't need Stolas anymore, so you can maybe cut a couple copies of Stolas to play more Ambel if you want to be able to like see it and guarantee the pressure. It could also just be something where like maybe you do it going first, you know. Fortia has the triple drive, so you just do the no sentinels, you might be able to just blow your opponent out before they get to play the game. And then finally, 4 copies of Ducala, because drawing cards is nice. For the trigger lineup, we're running 8 crit, obviously, 3 draws just because I think you do want to be able to go deeper into your deck, and the Lyrical OT because it is cheap. For the slightly more expensive version, we've cut Stolas. I felt like it is a little redundant now that we have Ravana. So instead we're playing a couple copies of Melty for the early game advantage. We are now playing Yuika to kind of like play well with Melty and in general just being able to protect your board, and then everything else is largely the same. We've just adjusted the ratios a bit to be able to fit Yuika into the deck. I'm also not opposed to maybe cutting some of the other cards down to lower numbers to be able to fit copies of Ambel. I'm not 100% decided on what my list would look like, but I do think generally it's going to be some variation of the cards being featured in these 2 lists. And also, of course, we're playing Ida's Faro now because we can afford to, in the slightly rich version of our friend list. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I think Fortia is a pretty cool budget archetype. I think it performs surprisingly well, and now has enough recursion to be consistent in the face of all the removal that we have in the current format. So if you want to play like a halfway decent deck, and you like having a cute cat girl in your ride line, then maybe give this one a shot. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye!